The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the guest's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of AIHA. AIHA does not endorse any guest or the entity that they represent. On this episode of Healthier Workplaces, are 3D printing emission tests adequate? We're joined by University of Cincinnati's Dr. Justin Morrow and Dr. Jun Wang. Stay with us.
At AIHA, we believe healthier workplaces start with investing in the future of occupational health and safety. By donating to the American Industrial Hygiene Foundation, you will help support scholarships, grants, and resources that empower the next generation of industrial hygiene and OEHS professionals. Every donation makes a difference, whether it's helping a student achieve their dreams or driving impactful research that protects workers worldwide. Join us in creating safer, healthier workplaces. Donate today at aiha.info/donate-AIHF and make an impact that lasts a lifetime.
Welcome, Justin and June. Great topic. We'll be talking about some of the environmental effects of working around 3D printers. And I guess, it is definitely a cutting edge technology that's becoming more and more commonplace, right, in the workplace. So I guess first off, let me start off by asking you both to give us a sneak peek into your upcoming session at the AIHA Connect 2025. And why should professionals in the OEHS area be concerned about emissions from 3D printers? So I'll
Yeah.
tip it to you first, Justin, since
Okay.
you're the top
Yeah,
guy.
I'm really excited to talk about it. So I'm really looking forward to this session. So we had, I think, 5 or 6 learning outcomes on this. The goal for me is really to spread more awareness about 3D printing. It's just so common now compared to where it was 5 years ago, and actually, it's what got me into the field of industrial hygiene. So we'll probably get into that a little bit, but. So what I really want people to come away with from this session is to understand where the emission standards are for 3D printing right now, and my views on whether they're sufficient or not, how they can be improved, and just share the really quick advances that have been happening in consumer 3D printing over the last 3 years or so. That's really important even in industrial setting because the lines have been blurring a lot between consumer and industrial scale. So now the consumer printers are putting out the same quality and speed as the industrial printers at a smaller scale and cost. So it's much more likely that you're going to see them in industrial environments, and with their cheap cost, you might be dealing with 10 of them instead of one of them. So I think that's why it's both for, honestly, I'm focusing a lot of my work towards hobbyists as well, just to kind of spread awareness. But in the industrial setting, it's getting much more common to have these small printers for individual engineers or for prototyping houses that don't focus on printing. So they're starting to get out all over the place, right?
So, June,
Yeah, so
your
I'll
view.
just go ahead and say that despite there's a lot of studies about 3D printing emissions out there, I feel like there's still significant knowledge gap, and the current testing standards are not adequate for encounter the newer 3D printing technologies like Justin just mentioned, faster, higher speed printing. I think this session will introduce young professionals to tests done by Justin and me with those newer 3D printing technology, get more understanding about them.
So what inspired the or two of you, I should say, to get into this topic as a session? It's why do you think this is such an important new area to be covering workplace health and safety?
Yeah. Well, so it's funny. That's also kind of my origin story in industrial hygiene. So I come to industrial hygiene from the 3D printing hobbyist world. And obviously, I'm a scientist at UC. I was a scientist before that, but not in industrial hygiene. So for me, I actually got into this profession by connecting with Dr. Wang as kind of a side interest. When I bought my own hobbyist 3D printers, installed them in my house, and had to figure out the safety and do my own research and literature review and kind of figure out what was known. So for me, that was a combination of Reddit and Google Scholar to see, okay, what does the community know, and then what has science been researching on this for the last 10 years or so on emissions and safety and ventilation and all that good stuff. So getting into that, I started, when there was an opportunity to do this full time, it's really been my main focus for, almost a year now, of trying to figure out my perspective as a hobbyist of why there wasn't enough guidance, like for me to figure out what I should do in my own home, right? So it felt like in that initial literature review, the aerosol science was really strong. The standards were really rigorous. But when I looked to so there actually is a 3D printing emissions measurement standard. When I looked to, okay, what printers should I use? How should I be using them? There was very little guidance. And again, my background is actually manufacturing science. And so, in graduate school, I was writing, CNC code instead of, doing anything with health or with aerosols. And so that's where, for me, it was really about how do we inject that into the standard so that the standards can really handle these advanced systems that are coming out, because the new consumer printers are really, really phenomenal, really fast, and very different than what the previous literature on emissions and safety was done on. So that was my motivation, was really to just help the literature catch up and be prepared to have standards that can provide more granular guidance. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Makes sense. June, I'm going to actually, throw this one at you. It's like, do you think that the current 3D printing standards are keeping up, with how quickly the technology of 3D printing is advancing? I mean, like, as you both pointed out, the, with the advent of these newer generation consumer, cost-centric printers, a lot of consumers are going to be having them in their residences, which I got to believe they don't have proper ventilation set up, typically in homes. But the same, as you mentioned, having more of them in the workplace, not, maybe even more of it, at individual people's workstations, they probably don't have that dedicated ventilation there either, right?
Yeah, well, first, to answer your first question about whether the standard is up to date or not, well, my honest answer is no, because 3D printing has been evolving since the last decade. And I've been doing 3D printing emission studies since 2013. And I've personally observing the 3D printing has been evolving, and it become more and more common in all the workplaces, the desktop 3D printers. Nowadays, it's not just a prototyping tool, but it's more like a piece of office equipment, just like a computer. Everyone has a computer, so now everyone is working with some 3D printing with different colors, different type of filaments, plastics or metals or ceramics, and all those things are going on. And as an industrial hygienist, we don't get a full picture of how that's going to work out or how that's going to impact the air quality in certain locations if you don't have engineering controls, if you don't have enough ventilations. So I think those kind of things really bother me, and that's kind of my motivation for study 3D printing.
I mean, the question is, how do we fill this current gap, right? Because obviously, it seems like the technology is coming out faster than the standards for implementing the technology or safely using the technology.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to take that one. So that's where what I really want to do is kind of leave the aerosol emissions part of the standards alone for the most part, because I think they're pretty solid of what instruments we should be using, how you should be measuring, designing chambers for good airflow and all of that. And really focusing on how do we make, there's two things. There's the quality of the tests and kind of the basic science, and then there's also the speed of the tests. So I think a lot of my motivation is, why does this even matter? So obviously we want safer workplaces and safe use at home and things like that. But a lot of the research, for example, has found that the variability, it's not just that, 3D printing is good or bad or, healthy or unhealthy. The problem is that with like one of the most common filaments, PLA or polylactic acid, there's a really good paper out by UL that said that the variability in the emissions can be up to about 6 orders of magnitude. I mean, it's huge variability, and it depends on tons of factors: the design of the printer, the processing conditions, and the filament type and brand and color and all of that good stuff. So the problem with the current standards, in part, is that they're high quality, but they're just too slow, and they're too slow to do anything to catch up with the large number of options available. So part of the work that we want to do is, again, maintain the quality of the aerosol science, but figure out how do we accelerate what's currently a 2-day testing standard to a half day, or to, instead of including one condition, how do we identify in one test the worst case condition by testing a lot of conditions? So we're kind of trying to go from this slow, nice steady state test that gives you very good results on kind of the science of aerosols, but won't cover enough of the processing space, right? So kind of separate out, well, what's the scientific test that's really slow and accurate, but then more of a quick and dirty kind of worst case scenario test, so that you can use that for a wider range of tests, and really say, well, I want to screen 10 or 20 different filaments for my workplace to see which one we should choose. How do you do that without spending 6 months as a dedicated project? Because that might work for a research institute, but it's not going to work when you're talking about these workplaces, right?
Yeah, I would think that the steady state testing is really better suited almost for laboratory type conditions, as opposed to being out in the field, like you're mentioning, with real world applications with multiple filaments and different things. So that's pretty important. So June, how can emissions from 3D printers impact air quality in places like university labs, or maker spaces, or even startups that are relying on this tech and maybe don't have a real advanced facility setup?
Yeah. So I guess, well, let's just look at a 3D printer. What's the fundamental 3D printer? It's heating a thermoplastic filaments, and heating will create aerosol, will aerosolize some part of the plastics, while they also simultaneously emit gases, pollutants like volatile organic compounds. So all those are, a lot of them are hazard or toxicant to certain degrees. I'm not saying they're all like the same, but stuff like nanoparticles or ultrafine particles, you can easily inhale it, and it can causing systematic effects. And on the other hand, the VOCs are the health effects of VOC can range from like just being people being allergic to it or sensitive to it, and all the way to something like styrene, which is can causing serious health effects. So the problem is that at a lot of places you just mentioned that's set up a desktop 3D printer, they don't necessarily think about what kind of ventilation. Is there adequate airflow? Is there enough fresh air to come in? Is there enough exhaust situations? So and a lot of times the manufacturers are not being extremely helpful. They're selling the 3D printers, but they're not giving enough information or giving enough knowledges about the potential health effects of those toxicants if you inhale them. So I think that's kind of also the motivation for 3D printing emission test is we want really want to understand about how much impact. It could be something, it varies because printing with PLA can be something not that hazardous, but with ABS or some different variants of ABS, it can causing some serious problem if you don't have enough ventilations.
Yeah, and this is certainly something we had, 20 plus years ago, when workplaces started to incorporate laser printers, near people's breathing zones, right? And I think probably a lot laser printers, I would think, are a lot less materials coming off of those. You did have the ultrafine issues and that sort of thing. So 3D printing, with thermoplastic and the heated effect, seems like it could pose a lot more issues for the occupants, right, for exposures.
Right.
So one of the things about laser printer is it does output ozone, which is there's going to be a lot of chemistry happen. I don't believe 3D printing at this point has anything to do with ozone. It could with certain type of 3D printing if they introduce ultraviolet light. But at this point, the primary concern is still particles that are very small, as well as gas that are very volatile.
Right. Yeah, and just to piggyback off of what you said before about like having it at individual workstations, before going to University of Cincinnati, I was in industry for a number of years, and the first 3D printer that I had, for my personal use was actually for work, not at home. And again, that's like these kind of $1,500 sort of machines that are meant to sit on a desktop and really be there for rapid prototyping during engineering projects. And I think one of the issues is that if you compare what the industrial desktop, the desktop 3D printers that are designed and marketed at companies in industrial use or serious prototypers, they're generally enclosed and they, again, look self-contained. But one of the issues is that while they look enclosed really means it's trying to contain and control heat, not the emissions. And there's almost always a fan blowing straight out the back. So it's actually pulling air into the printer and shooting it out the back, even if it looks like it's a self-contained little box. So I think part of it is just that there's, kind of help people set expectations for, does enclosed really mean enclosed from a vapor and health perspective? Does that do anything for the particles, or do we still need to treat it like something that should be in a manufacturing space? So, one of my concerns with 3D printing is just that it looks like a toy, or it looks like a personal device to people. But when I see it as a manufacturing scientist, I see a manufacturing process, and I treat it like a manufacturing process. That's just at smaller scale. So I think a lot of the safety of improving that is just approaching it with the right mindset, right?
Are you ready to elevate your knowledge and career in 2024? AIHA University's e-learning subscription has you covered. With a full subscription, you gain access to 24 contact hours of expert-led education throughout the year. Participate live in our exclusive AIHA University webinars, or catch the recordings at your convenience. It's designed to fit your schedule and your goals. From cutting-edge tools to essential OEHS insights, the AIHA e-learning subscription delivers the latest trends, technologies, and best practices to keep you at the top of your field. Don't wait to unlock your potential. Visit aiha.info/e-learning sub and subscribe today.
So what are some of the biggest health risks that occupants and users might be exposed to with 3D printing, especially in environments where there may not be fully developed health and safety practices for using these devices?
Right. Well, I think I'll lead on that one. So the health risks, that's another area of the literature that honestly is a little bit shakier than I'd like it to be, right? So there is good guidance. So I think that's where the first thing is, I'm a big proponent of 3D printing. I use it in my home. I was just at a maker fair down in Kentucky, raising awareness of 3D printing. But again, that's in an environment where you're trying to foster creativity. So the last thing I want to do is, first scare people away from it. But I think that's where, you have to have this sense of, okay, let's make sure we're being safe and healthy. Like, again, teaching kids woodworking or metalworking or whatever it is, 3D printing is just another manufacturing process, right? So I think in terms of what's known, it's probably best to start with kind of the current guidance. The CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and NIOSH, right, just released a pretty good, lengthy report on 3D printing with a lot of kind of best practices and information on potential risks. It's known in the 3D printing community, so this is where I point people to Reddit, because right now that's one of the most active communities to crowdsource information. So what's kind of agreed on generally is that some filaments are much safer than others. So PLA, or polylactic acid, is bio-derived, and most of the VOCs measured coming off of that in scientific studies are related to lactic acid. So caprolactam, things like that. Those would generally be considered asthmagens, so can cause asthma or make it worse, or allergens. So it's the sort of thing where could cause allergies or exacerbate existing allergies. But as far as we know, there's not, a lot of carcinogens or something much more serious that could build up associated with PLA. Now with ABS, that's acrylonitrile butadiene styrene. Again, styrene is in the name, and styrene is a known carcinogen. So in the plastic, it's tied up in the structure. So again, Lego bricks are made of ABS as well because they're just very sturdy. They're an excellent engineering plastic. And so they're really attractive for people to use for, again, these kind of hobbyist and like RC car applications where you need something rugged. But there's also a higher risk. So if you don't know that, again, ABS is actually styrene containing, then that's an issue. I'd say that honestly, if you go on Reddit for 10 minutes, you probably figure out the difference between PLA and ABS and which one's better. So my concern right now is actually more about a lot of people didn't try printing with ABS because the cheaper printers were unenclosed, and ABS just doesn't work well in those. But now that printers are getting cheaper and enclosed, people see an enclosed printer that advertises printing ABS and don't realize that enclosure is not keeping in all of the chemicals and particulates and things like that. So it's kind of starting to go the other way a little bit of people feeling emboldened to go try ABS now. So I would advise caution still with that one. So again, that's one where with the wrong materials, there's some known risks. So again, styrene is a known carcinogen, cancer-causing agent. And that's one where some of the literature is a little bit mixed on whether it's really like a workplace issue for people in maker spaces or schools or not. So we just need more research to see if there's long-term effects from printing with ABS, for example, in schools and maker spaces. But I think the bigger thing for, like, let's say the young hobbyists is the amount of exposure and the type of exposure, right? So I think that's where when I talk to families, I try not to scare them. It's a really simple list of, do you know what you're printing with, what plastic you're using? Try to stay towards PLA and away from ABS. How often are you using that, and where are you using that? So, if you don't have to be present when it's printing, why put it in your living room, right? So if you have other spaces like a garage or basement, that's where I then suggest, okay, if it has to be in the house, you can ventilate, you can enclose. But I'm also realistic about being a hobbyist myself, that you're not going to buy a $100 printer and spend $500 on ventilation, right? I did, but that's why I got into it. Right?
That doesn't mean you shouldn't.
I know. So that's why, it's just, if you are aware of this, then you can shop these days for printers that have built-in HEPA filters.
So there are units available on consumer type based devices.
Absolutely. Again, it's
I
all
was going to say, this is like a real, the fact that there are enclosed looking devices that really are just still fan boxes that are blowing all the particulate right out of the exhaust fan. From a consumer standpoint, right, they're really not that attuned to what's going on. So are these newer ones that maybe offer HEPA filtration or some type of an enhanced ability to capture what's coming off it, are they being widely marketed in the space now?
Yes. Again, the price point is now affordable, but not cheap, right? So affordable is like $1,500. So you're talking about something that, someone who, if this is their big hobby, you're talking about like 2 nice Xbox S's or, X or, a nice build it yourself computer sort of thing. But this is not like a buy it for your birthday, right? Sort of present. So those low end ones are still the ones that will either be totally unenclosed, or like we have one that we had in our first study that was only $400, but is enclosed, right? And can print ABS. So that's where you have to be careful. The price point will, like, again, it's you get what you pay for, right? So if you're at $400 or $500, it's probably not going to have a lot of those safety features. And that's where you can always add on to that, right? So that's where the room that you print in, the airflow, the external HEPA filtration, that sort of thing can be used. There was one family I talked to that actually, the dad was an engineer, and he basically designed his daughter a printing room, right? So they took a closet and sealed it and put a a smoke detector, again, in case of fire, and an air filter. And the nicer printers also have camera monitors. So that's where it was kind of like, I didn't really have any advice for them, you know? So I'm more interested in people that have never heard about emissions from 3D printers, or in industry where, you know, they're used to the large 3D printers. And of course, that goes on the manufacturing floor. And honestly, it's not a concern because you're already applying all of the standard industrial hygiene. But now when you see the small one, you don't mentally put it in that category, right? So you bring it into the office and you're treating it like a regular laser printer, right? So I think that's where a lot of it is just, again, bringing a mindset of this is a small manufacturing device.
I think I want to echo Justin's message about not trying to scare people away, because 3D printing is a great tool for whatever reasons. Prototyping, we use that in the lab all the time to making respirator testing mannequins, to making new samplers, and those are great usage of 3D printing. We don't want to scare people away, but I think there's certain scenarios and there's certain knowledge or trainings that are educations that people need to take before they actually start printing. Not just buying something off Amazon and you get a package, you open it, and they start printing immediately.
What do you think the first step individuals could do to, better manage these risks or potential risks from, workplace exposures to 3D printing? Well, where do we start?
Yeah.
Where we are now.
Well, it's funny because I'm very new to the world of industrial hygiene. I came from manufacturing and from hobbyists. And so, I started with the motivation of knowing what I needed, what my goals were. I wanted to be able to use this. I wanted to be able to do it safely. And I wanted to be able to do it effectively. So that's where there's this tension between, I just bought a printer, it's very expensive, I want to use it, I have projects, and then the safety rules. Right? So can I print overnight? Yes or no? Can I print when I'm away? Yes or no? Is the safe appropriate for using when I'm there? And, so am I going to start limiting the effectiveness of this tool by my safety practices, right? So that's where the longer that I'm in the world of industrial hygiene, I'm starting to learn some of the standard methods and approaches that I think are really helpful. So of course, the hierarchy of controls, which is new to me, but not new to your audience, probably. It's interesting that I think a lot of, engineers, for the most part, especially I think that, design engineers who actually like to make physical things, it's like they jump in the hierarchy right at engineering controls, right? That's the kind of everything above that's like, well, someone else can take care of that. But I think that's where the focus of my work is partly there are engineering controls. That's where we're talking about units with filtration or, buying air quality monitors. Those definitely respond to 3D printing emissions. A lot of them are in the nanoscale, so they're not going to be telling you exactly the amount that's in the nanoscale, but the larger particles produced can be measured with simple home air monitors, and that will tell you something about how much nanoparticles are also being produced, although we're researching exactly, what that link looks like. But I think that's where, to be practical about it, if you go back to the hierarchy, you start with the big question, do I need to 3D print it, right? Yes or no? So there's a lot of things where, honestly, if you don't need to print it, like, just don't print it, right? But as soon as then, yes, I have to do that. Okay, do I have to print it out of ABS? Does it really need to be that? Is there like a tough PLA that would work that would just not contain styrene, replacement? That's actually a good strategy. And one of my passions right now is I think that just the standards for measurement, because they're a little slow, they tell you big picture, we know really well that PLA is generally safer than ABS. But again, 6 orders of magnitude difference just in PLA, right? So they're not the same. So what we need is when you're trying to replace it, you've replaced the PLA, but did you get a high emitter or a low emitter? And did you consider any fillers that are in there? So this is where I tell people, if you don't need to use, now you can buy glass-filled PLA, and that just scares the heck out of me, right? And then carbon fiber-filled, which scares me less. But again, now you're talking about fibers, and it's not just the plastic,
Sure.
right? So these are things that need special control. So it's just within, it's not just PLA, consider your material. And then there's actually a lot you can do on the process temperature, process speed to minimize that. But that's when you're starting to say, well, I'm really trying to minimize this. You've already done 90% of the work by, where did you place the printer? Are you sitting next to it? Like, what's your actual exposure to this? Do you have air circulation, right? So I think a lot of the basics honestly do the heavy lifting. We're just talking about, walking in with eyes wide open. And on the scientific side, I think our mission really is that granular advice about different types of PLA, for example, or even which additives it is that makes a high emitter or low emitter. I don't think the manufacturers really know that. Nobody knows that. So that's the sort of thing that's on us to speed up the tests to provide that guidance, right?
So June, what's a key takeaway that you'd like attendees at the AIHA Connect 2025 conference session that you guys will be doing, especially for those earlier in their careers, to leave with about 3D printing emissions and occupational safety, right, regarding 3D printing emissions?
Yeah, I just kind of want to reiterate my message before. I think the 3D printing it's a great tool, and it's constantly evolving. And you don't need to be a manufacturer or some sort of a specialty in manufacturing 3D printing to use it. You can get online, like Justin said, you can get on the Reddit or other hobbyist community to learn all those different technologies. But as a traditional industrial hygienist, I always being skeptical about any new process or new materials. So we always have to keep our eyes open on different materials or different technologies that's being added on to 3D printing. For example, printing faster, or printing with different colors, or printing with filaments with different additives. Those things could have synergistic effects of making a new health risk or making a new threat to health or people surrounding health, or people to you or people surrounding 3D printing or 3D printers. So I think the key message here is there's a lot to do with 3D printing. We barely scratched the surface yet. So with newer, faster testing standards, we may be able to unearth some knowledge or some truths about whether 3D printing is safe or not. At this point, as industrial hygienists, we should just keep our eye open in the workplace, at our home, to look at all the 3D printers and look at the technologies and using our knowledge, using the knowledge we learn from school, and just making our professional judgment on whether it's safe or not, whether more tests should be done or not, and whether there's more things are going to potentially being harmful or potentially not being harmful.
Justin?
No, I think that's great. And I think that's where the other thing I wanted to leave participants with is that this field is still evolving really quickly. And because there's so many different printers and filaments, I think this is one area where industrial hygienists in a workplace can do a lot to figure out how to make their particular workplace safe with this combination of, their printer and their filaments, because there's the general guidance is sort of weak right now in terms of, at the high level, there's really good advice, but when you get to individual workplaces, it can really vary a lot. So like June said, I think a lot of the standard tools that they're taught in school should be really applicable here. So the point of the session is really just to bring some awareness and to help share what some of the specific concerns should be. And of course, we're developing some improvements to the standard that's not, kind of ready for general practice yet. But there's a lot of simple sorts of tests and approaches that they can do in their own workplace or other environments to help just assess what the level of health is in their environment. So yeah, I think that's hoping that it's kind of a note of encouragement that this is an area where 3D printers on the consumer level are very useful. They're getting very good, and they're going to keep popping up. So the industrial hygienists can do a lot to make sure that those are put in safely and that there's good standard protocols, so we don't have to worry about, kind of any future effects, right?
Well, Justin, June, thank you so very much for joining us on this episode of Healthier Workplaces. Great topic that's really timely and important. So best of luck with your session at the upcoming AIHA Connect 2025 event coming up later. Well, actually, early next year. We definitely, it's something I guess we ought to keep more abreast of this new technology and how to safely implement it and use it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Obviously, I love to talk about this. This is the project that got me in the door at the University of Cincinnati, because June was an expert on this and did some previous research, so it was just a perfect collaboration. So we'll be talking about some other things as well, silica and other concerns, but I think 3D printing is really the one that's kind of near and dear right to me.
Well, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. I hope to see everyone in Kansas City next year. Yeah.
So that's our show for this week. Until next time, I'm Bob Krell. Stay healthy.